Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 37, this one released in October 1996, discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And yet another rather odd cover. Seems to be like some person lying on the ground, or in the ground maybe? I don't know. It's about artificial intelligence, or to be more precise, artificial life. We'll be looking at some games using that. So, the opening column talking about what the future might be with artificial life, focusing on Millennium's creatures, which we'll be looking at later. Here we have, what's his name again? Sakaguchi or something? Yeah, Mitsuguchi. The last time I talked about him, without even mentioning how he would later make on Rez, Space Channel 5, and Child of Eden, so a very famous producer, but I didn't recognize him. I'm not very good at names, and well, that's him apparently. He's back in this issue. So, more talk about the M2. Nothing that really interesting though when it comes to news. Edge being a little bit skeptical though. And of course the M2 would never be released. We do see some prototypes here. The blue one is probably the best known, but there's also this gray one. And here's another one which kind of looks like a PlayStation 2 if you ask me. So there's some look at the newest Virtua Fighter game, which we'll get a preview later on in the magazine. Yeah, so Nintendo 64 also dropping its price to $200, so all three main consoles being $200. And 3DO, the company, not focusing on the console anymore, M2, now focusing on games, and mostly known for the Army Men games, but also they had a online multiplayer role-playing game called Meridian, and it was quite popular back in its day. Not as big as Ultima Online, but still used by thousands of players. It was 3D, and apparently you can still play it today, and it was played quite a lot until about 2002. So here's some talk about the Macintosh computer getting more quality games and a certain strategy. A lot of focus on the Pippin, and this guy, he believes that the Pippin will do well in Europe, but that never happened. Yeah, I do recall some Blizzard games being ported to the Mac. It wouldn't be until about 2007 that most games would make it to the Mac, though. Perhaps something to do with Macs using Intel chips. So here we have Peter Gabriel again, same game as last month, talking about his funny game called Eve, which had high production costs, but I don't think it was that interesting to play with. You could make your own kind of music videos or something. Here we have Joan Montes, I think his name is pronounced, and he works for the Sony European branch, and they had a success with Total NBA, and now working on the Porsche racing game, which wasn't that successful, called Porsche Challenge. There's also Rapid Racer, which looks a lot like Wipeout. I don't recall that being a hit either. Here's a brief talk with somebody who works for Silicon Graphics. The choice between MIPS or more chips. Basically, do we have dedicated chips for doing graphics, or do we simply let the main CPU and computers do the hard work? And I think it's still a combination of both. Here's some talk about the demo of Quake and Big Red Racing being passed along on the internet, not only on CDs and magazines, but also on the internet, everybody having the game. And apparently Gremlin wasn't happy with that because it cut into the sales of their game, Big Red Racing. Quake, though, would become a huge hit, though, so it was good to have the demo going around. But yes, demos are often a Not always the best idea. There's an extra credits issue about all the bad reasons, all the reasons for not making the demo, and makes sense. Although, I have to admit, the PlayStation 1, they had demos for Tekken 3, Metal Gear Solid, Gran Turismo, and they really sparked interest. Here's Eugene Jarvis, who made Robotron 2084 and Defender, and later on Smash TV. And he recently made Cruisin' USA, which wasn't as such a big hit. But this guy seems to be very optimistic. It's kind of somewhat of a California attitude to him. And he says he still plays Robotron every day. And he loves games like Descent and Street Fighter. He talks about games as a whole. And yeah, you know, gameplay being more important than graphics. Being very optimistic about the future. So, yeah, nice to hear from him. Not a big player in the business, though, by then. And after this, I haven't heard him at all anymore until he helped with the recent shooting game. What's it called again? Deus Ex Machina? Ex Machina, I think it was called. But I'm bad at names, but it's a newer version of Robotron 2084. Here we have Squaresoft. You might recognize this imagery of the city you find in Final Fantasy VII. What's it called again? Mishra or something? A lot of talk with Sakaguchi, who talks a lot about how the graphics played a big role, that they needed CD technology to do that, and that a lot of Hollywood talent was used to make all these fascinating looks. Final Fantasy VII is also well known for not using the imagery of Yoshitaka Amano, who is one of my favorite artists of the current day and age. So, yeah, perhaps the best role-playing game ever made. Interesting that they didn't actually spend that much time on this game, probably because there was a lot of staff working on it. And this game made the PlayStation the biggest console in Japan, and there was later Final Fantasy 8 and 9. There's also talk about Tobo No. 1, a fighting game with some RPG elements, not that very popular, although it did seem to have a cult following, and Final Fantasy Tactics, which was excellent, not made by Sakaguchi, but by Akihiko Yoshida, I guess? I don't know. I could never remember who made this line of games, because he would go on to make Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy 12, and more or less take over Final Fantasy from Sakaguchi. Here again we have Sony Computer Entertainment again, SCE in Europe. Again talking about Porsche Challenge and Rapid Racer. So, very ambitious. And I'm sure Sony, I should maybe looked up into that, what other games they made after that. Biohazard 2 being shown. I don't remember if there was already a review of Resident Evil 1, but Resident Evil 2 looking fantastic. Rev Limit would be a racing game for the Nintendo 64, but was never released. Wild Choppers, I think it was released, but nobody cared about it. Also for Nintendo 64. Climax gets 3 or 4 pages. Yes, 3 pages to look at a subpar game called Dark Savior. The not the sequel, but the successor to Landstalker, which was great, but nobody seemed to really like Dark Savior that much for the Saturn. So quite a shame that wasn't a hit. There was also Lady Stalker for the Super Nintendo, which wasn't as good as Landstalker either. Here you have Digital Animations. I couldn't find anything about them on the web. They were working on a game called Steel Legions, which we'll see again later on, which not only had fantastic graphics, but also apparently sophisticated AI, but I couldn't find anything about it. So maybe they changed the name of the game. I don't know. Here we have Sega AM NX. Again, at the time looking at the touring car game, not very special, but later on, again I forgot his name, Mitsuguchi would work on Rez and Space Channel 5, bringing some success to Sega. Very ambitious kid, but the racing game wasn't very interesting. Artificial Life. I have no idea where they got this image from. It looks very artistic, but definitely doesn't say anything about the subject matter. And looking at creatures, something kind of like a Tamagotchi game. You could collect these creatures, and their artificial intelligence would have them learning from each other and doing weird things. It was a commercial success. And again, digital animations talking about how the AI of the characters you fought against, they would learn from you and copy your way of playing and add that to the repertoire. I'd love to see that in real, but I couldn't find anything about it. Here's some kind of engine called the Mutator engine, making artificial life using formulas. Alright, I love this font, Chicago. Hardly see it anymore. Okay, so this is a sign that the PlayStation is doing better than the Saturn, at least in England, because we have a catalog in Edge, and we see Tekken being advertised, Extreme Games, PlayStation, and another page for PlayStation. We see games like Crash being shown, Tekken 2, Formula 1, Wipeout 2007. These games haven't been released yet. Some funky joypads. And what does the Saturn get? Well, it only gets one page. Great games though. Tomb Raider, even though it was my taste. Nights into Dreams, Tunnel B1, all good. Fighting Vipers was also pretty good. I don't remember about Exhumed. It's I don't know. But the Saturn playing second fiddle by now. Again, another PlayStation game, Gunship, Die Hard Trilogy, Tunnel B1, made in Britain. A year later, Yoshi's Island is still being promoted. One of the few games for the Super Nintendo still interesting. Okay, new media hosted by Ocean. What do we have? A program to mix CDs, I guess. Music CDs, I don't know. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I played this as a kid, and this was rather kind of stupid. A lot of parodies of other games like Tetris and Mortal Kombat, and a lot of sound bites and images from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Only for dedicated fans. Some cool gadgets, like a mini computer to carry with you, made by Hewlett Packard. Spin Control, looks like another program for doing some DJing. Some books, Escape Velocity and the Multimedia Yearbook. And a competition for that backpack, which would give you sensations while playing. I've never seen that in real life. What's it called again? The Hour Interactor, was that what it was called? I saw commercials in it in GamePro. On to the reviews. So the original Broken Sword game is released, Shadow of the Templars, and probably the best outing. Rather sophisticated click and carry adventure, made in Britain. Edge gives it a 9. It was also released for the Game Boy Advance, if I recall. Probably pretty cheap on Steam by now. You might want to look into this if you aren't familiar with the Broken Sword series. Tunnel B1, a darker version of Wipeout in many senses. Very fast, you easily crashed, extremely difficult. Made in England, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Tobal number 1, like I said, a fighting game made by Square with RPG elements. The story's not interesting at all, and Edge gives it a 6. Saturn Bomberman, by many seen as the best version to play of Bomberman because of the 10-player mode, although I don't think playing with 10 players is all that better than playing with 5. In fact, I think 5 is the best amount of players to do Bomberman. You could do that on Super Bomberman 3 for the Super Nintendo, and it's also for the Mega Drive possible. So those are my favorite versions to play. This game gets a 7 out of 10, and Edge saying the single-player mode is not interesting at all. Andretti Racing. I don't know if Andretti also did Formula 1, but I don't know. But this game features both NASCAR and IndyCar, and gets a 7 out of 10. It's for the PlayStation 1. And Edge saying has a little bit for everybody who likes racing, but not that very good. Images of Final Fantasy VII. I remember these places. This would be Tobal number 1. Of course, the in-game graphics weren't that good. So, Virtua Fighter 3 being shown. Images look rather blue, but at the time this game looked fantastic. As a kid, I remember seeing Virtua Fighter 2. No, I remember seeing Daytona USA and thinking, oh, graphics can't get better than this. They don't, and I still believe they don't have to be better than that, but when I saw Virtua Fighter 3, I realized, okay, I was wrong. Graphics can get better. And when I saw Virtua Fighter 3, I thought, graphics can't get better. Again, I was proven wrong, but it's still a nice game to look at. Some talk about Virtua Fighter 3 being made easier, but I recall it actually being more technical than Virtua Fighter 2. And I didn't play much of it because I didn't care. I did have a Dreamcast, but I didn't care for Virtua Fighter at the time. I loved playing Virtua Fighter 4 though, and I did pretty well in tournaments actually for some reason, even though I didn't like the game that much. Sega Ages being released with 2 classic games, Afterburner and hold on, we also have Space Harrier, maybe 3 games. And Outrun, of course, for the Saturn. And the PlayStation, you get to have, oh, it's also for the Saturn, the Bubble Bobble collection with the original Bubble Bobble and Rainbow Islands, where you get to play the kids who may sprout islands out of their hands. I never liked the series that much. I preferred Mario so much more, but very popular at the time. And we are reaching the end of this magazine. Let's get through all the advertisements for working in the industry. I'll show them to you nevertheless. That might be of interest to you. And we'll get to the letters soon enough. But what were they about again? Let's see. I'm looking at the pictures, but it don't help me remember what was in the letters, actually. Yeah. So, somebody being concerned about the Nintendo 64 being too expensive and not getting the right support it needs from third-party developers, so that person would be correct, especially in the last thing. Interesting. Let's talk about with Quake on the PC and how impressive it is, and Edge saying, well, the PlayStation will probably never be able to play Quake, but the PlayStation 1 version of Quake 2 is very impressive and one of my favorite 3D shooting games of all time. For reasons I can't explain now, but it was a heck of a lot of fun to play together, multiplayer. Yeah, our game's running out of ideas, sort of. I guess you could say so, but in the late 90s, people were mostly interested in trying to be realistic, Mario 64 being different than that, trying to be something different than the rest. And one person writes asking, how could you give it a 10? Are you sure the game is perfect? Will you be playing this game forever? Will it make you not play other games? Well, that's not what a 10 means. A 10 means basically it's the highest category of game, and Edge makes that clear. So, and the Q&A is about technical things. Again, talking about 50 hertz, 60 hertz conversions. Talk about... what about Namco releasing the System 2.3? That's a good question. I don't remember any games for it though. Somebody asking, when is Soul Edge going to be released? Well, this was late 1996. Didn't know it was a hit in Europe already at the time. And that's pretty much it for this issue. We have a preview for next one, Wipeout 2097, arguably the best Wipeout game. And there's also some talk about looking at Dundee, who made Lemmings. And we're going to be looking at the people making Grand Theft Auto. So that's important for later on. They wouldn't know at the time. And that's Edge Magazine issue 37 with a funny looking cover. Will Edge go back to making good looking covers again? I don't know. No, they will eventually, but not sure about next one. But hope to see you then. Whoops.